Well, for more on the significant step taken by the federal government towards averting organized labor strike, we are now joined by Adewale Oyerinde. He's the Director General, Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, otherwise known as NECA. He will also address concerns surrounding alleged diversion of workers' funds through the Nigeria Social Insurance Trust Fund. Thank you so much for joining us on the news tonight.
Thank you for having us once again.
Well, we're yet to hear from the organized labor. If this does assuage their concerns, because they did raise a number of issues, I think about 3 or 4 of them. Yeah. The federal government has responded to 2 out of all of that. But wait to hear from the NLC. Let me ask you, what do you make of this? Explain to us. Now, what we hear is that these monies, although the Accountant General in March of 2024 issued a directive to stop the deductions, and some reversals were made, explain to us how contributions by workers ended up being seen as government money.
In the first instance, maybe we'll just correct the impression. It's employers' contributions to the NSITF to address the issue of injuries during and in the course of work for workers. So employers actually contribute. So
at the end of the day, it still ends up as money for workers.
Money for workers, basically. Yes. Yes. So it is not a tax. It is not revenue for government. It is contributed for a specific purpose to address the issue of injury during or in the course of work. And it's not only peculiar to the NSITF. We also have PECOM that we mentioned. The contributions to PECOM is basically for pension after work, so it's not also revenue to government. And also ITF, Industrial Training Fund. The contribution to Industrial Training Fund by employers also is not revenue, because at least 50% of the contributions has to be reimbursed to employers that are contributing. And because you cannot budget for injuries, you cannot budget for accidents, so it becomes difficult for those funds to go to the federation account. Because once it goes there, then the process of addressing those immediate needs becomes very difficult. And that is the concern that Labour raised. That's the concern that we had raised long ago, the concern about the 50% deductions, the concern about the concern of PECOM board. I think we had raised those issues because they are fundamental governance issues. And if we are talking about corporate governance, especially on some bodies like PECOM, NSITF, they have very strong social partner context, what we call tripartite context. I think the worst that will have happened is those deductions continuing. We addressed the issue, but I think Labour have his way of creating bigger attention, and government seem to respond to chaos faster than
absolutely. It looks like, I mean, NLC's threat, and 7-day ultimatum has finally paid off. But I'm curious, of this 17 trillion naira pension fund assets, and you say this money is actually set aside for workplace incidents.
Injury, that's for the NSITF.
Occupational hazards and what have you.
Absolutely.
For the NSITF. Yep. To what extent, really, have these funds been deployed in that direction, to take care of workers who found themselves, in this situation? I'm curious to know.
Quite a lot is being done by the NSITF in the context of paying compensation. And fortunately, the NSITF board had this meeting today, just around the corner here. And the issue of compensation to workers that are also injured is also came on board for the board to approve those compensations. So compensation is being paid regularly by the NSITF. Can much more be done? Absolutely, much more can be done. As the fund performed within the context of its limitation, yes, it has performed within the context of its limitation. But there's always room for improvement. So the view that government cannot take from that fund that is specifically created for that purpose, I think is quite germane. And while employers don't go on strike, as it were, but the core objective of NLC's threat, I think we are aligned absolutely with the objective to get government to take its hand off that fund, and also to constitute the board of PECOM, which is also very critical.
I asked that question because it does seem at face value that this 17 trillion, maybe it's just lying there, and
that's the PECOM fund, the pension fund.
It's not exactly being put to use, and that is why government thinks, okay, since we're in such serious revenue drive, we might as well take advantage of this and help fix the economy.
The PECOM fund,
in whose
pension
interest
fund
is
itself,
it for this funds to just be there?
Now the pension fund itself is the 17 trillion plus we're talking about. The NSITF fund is not up to that quantum.
Okay.
Now for PECOM and for pension, because employees, people retire at different times, and there's also opportunity for voluntary retirement. And once you retire, you have the opportunity of getting your regular payment, either through program withdrawal, either that's the monthly collection, or through annuity. So that fund also have to stay. Now the threats or the risk we have faced in recent times is government, the attraction of 17 trillion, and the need for infrastructural development. There's a conversation, okay, let government borrow from the fund for infrastructural development. But the issue of trust always comes into play, that if you borrow from here, what is the guarantee that those that owns it, when they need it, they will actually have access to it? That is the core of the issue, and the resistance from all stakeholders, both employers and workers, on government dipping its hand, whether borrowing from the pension fund or not. That's basically the core of the resistance. But you cannot take a unilateral action as government, because the core stakeholders in the pension industry is basically the employers and the workers, because those are the two contributing. And also in other social schemes, the NSITF also, the employer is the core, is the major contributor, while the workers are the core beneficiaries. So that established our interest in both corporate governance and both the application of those funds.
Yeah, you talk about corporate governance and trust, but you also raise a question about transparency in workers' social protection funds and how they are being managed. Whether it's PECOM or NSITF, we now see that there might be some questionable actions as to how those monies are being used. So beyond this particular time or period that the government has now responded, what are some of the reforms you, as an employer organization or body, would like to see? What sort of reforms would ensure transparency, accountability, good governance, and trust in those workers' funds, to say, as a worker, I can trust that my contributions are there, and your contribution as my employer is there?
Now, the structure of those agencies, NSITF, PECOM, ITF, they are structured in such a way that there is a strong element of the social partners in the boards, and the board ordinarily should be the overall supervising body. So in the NSITF management board, you have representative of workers, you have representative of employers, you have representative of CBN, and representative of government. And the workers' representative takes care of the workers' interest. The employers' representative takes care of the employers' interest. The CBN representative takes care of governance interests, and the Ministry of Labor's representative also takes care of government interests. So there's a balanced representation as enshrined in ILO Convention on Tripartite Representation. Also for PECOM, you have the representative of workers, of NLCTUC, you have representative of the employers, NECA on the board, and you have representative of government on the board, to create that balance so that transparency can also be enshrined within the context of that. Once you apply with goodwill, you respect the act, and you work towards fulfilling the objective of that fund itself, leveraging the provisions of the act, then transparency to a large extent will be guaranteed. Because if discussion will be held at the board level, so if figures are not adding up at the board level, then you have the option of escalating. So once the board is not constituted, you give or you leave the management of those structures to a government-appointed MD or government-appointed Director General and a government-appointed chairman, who is not liable to respond to the call of the key stakeholders, because it's just the sole administrators, so to say. And those are the contexts of transparency that I think Labour has spoken about. Constitute the board, it's in the act that the board must be in existence.
Yeah,
so there's no reason.
Board.
Absolutely, there's no reason why the board should not be constituted immediately one is dissolved.
The other issues too that the NLC raised, you know, that there are moves by the government to amend the NSITF Act in a way that would disenfranchise workers and give government full control of the funds. I'd like you to address that on the one hand. Now that there's a board in place, what are your expectations? What do you think this board really should do to engender this trust that you talk about and good governance?
Well, Mr. Agbaje is a well-renowned banker, an economist also, and we believe his coming on board will add value to the conversation and the safety of the pension funds. After his appointment, I think the next thing is for the institutional representatives in the board, because there's no individual representatives. All board members represent one institution or the other. I think we have the Security and Exchange Commission representative in the board. We have NECA representative, NSC representative. Once that is established, I think the direction for the board will be set. Now, for the issue of the NSITF Act being amended, you know, all the agencies in the Ministry of Labour, in that ecosystem, they are quite peculiar because they are founded on the principle of tripartism, drawing from the ILO conventions. So many ILO conventions on tripartism, on social dialogue that Nigeria have ratified. And those conditions are the presuppose that for any law in that ecosystem, and particular about that ecosystem, labor and industrial ecosystem, that before you amend any law, those processes must be initiated and driven by the tripartite, by the employers, by the workers, and by the government, led by the Ministry of Labour. And that process, that principle, was also used when we amended the Nigerian labour law that is still probably with the Ministry of Justice. So the tripartite drives that process, you know, not an individual person driving that process, not another institution. It is the tripartite that drives that process. And because Nigeria have ratified those conventions that specify this, that give this guidance, the simple expectation by social partners is that we respect that. That if there's going to be amendment of any labor-related law or policies or regulation, it is driven by the tripartite. Right. In this ecosystem, out of this ecosystem, anything can be done. An individual can come with a bill, an individual can come with a regulation, but in this ecosystem, I think the tripartite drives that process. And that is, I think that's Labour's concern, and that's why they went, they also listed that part of the concern.
Okay, thank you very much. Adewale Oyerinde is the DG, Nigeria Employers Consultative Association. Was actually going to ask you, what about employers that don't deduct the monthly?
There is a huge penalty.
Are you doing anything about that?
There's a huge penalty, and there's processes in place to actually deal with them.
I hope it's huge enough to serve as a deterrent. Well, I have to say thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.